Mhm. Well, hey, it's 6 o'clock. Should we just get going or wait a couple more minutes or?
Wait another minute or two and then just get going. This isn't technically a meeting, so we don't need to do the roll, no need that. We're just gonna go through the listening session, talk about the options. And if anybody needs some clarifying questions or comments, go through that.
Bobby White was got in touch with me. He's trying to get on. He needs the link. Is that the Salisbury Zoo / whatever the numbers are?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that what he? Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Troy.
what I sent him. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Troy. Okay. Should we get going? All right. Hello, folks. So tonight's a listening session, and what we're going to do first is show you some of the results from your ratings. And Dr. North, I guess, Quinn, you're going to read
Read the options.
Okay, and go through there. But before we get going, it's just probably a good idea to remember how far you've come with all these meetings and whatnot. And now the purpose of listening is to help us help you. Sounds like Jerry Maguire. Help me, help you. In terms of seeing where common ground has been established, where common ground is close, and so that in the meeting in November, we have specific things that you guys are telling us you want to talk about informally in the meeting when there's a quorum, so that at the end of that night, we can have the vote. So this is just providing a little bit more time so that we can get your final agreement to Secretary Rico and her people so she can do her job in November for the December 1st deadline. So Elizabeth, you can share your screen if you'd like, and we can go from there. And Quinn, if you want to read off those things, that the 2 sections, and then after that, we're just gonna listen to what you guys are thinking and see where that could help us prepare for the November 8th meeting. Sound like a good idea?
So for the draft recommendations, the document you all received, I just sent that maybe 10 minutes ago. It's a draft document, and Dr. North will be taking notes, and you can see it in real time. The OAC draft recommendations. This document contains 2 types of draft recommendations. In purple, options that have been rated 75% or higher and the text is approved. In the blue text, options that have been rated 75% and the text has not been approved. So for the first option, obviously, options that have been rated 75% or higher and have approved text. Shell resource recommendations. There's important need for clean shell and substrate that will support enhancement of all sectors of the oyster resource, including the public fishery, aquaculture, and public and private restoration efforts. DNR should evaluate and develop cost-effective strategies for identifying and obtaining sources of shells and substrate. DNR should review the current state laws and regulations to evaluate and develop potential strategies, including providing economic incentives to retain shell in the state of Maryland and reuse it. And DNR should support a Maryland-wide substrate action subcommittee of the OAC to evaluate strategies, costs, and benefits for substrate enhancement. Enforcement and monitoring recommendations. Enforcement and monitoring play an important role in ensuring the protection of the oyster resource and the timely tracking of its status. The recommendations are: DNR should work to improve the fall dredge survey. Examples given: new locations, fall dredge survey before start of the fishery, cooperative survey within industry, etc. And DNR should develop tools to mark navigation hazards and oyster management boundaries. Management action recommendations. The OAC recommends that the following actions be taken to rebuild oyster populations: enhance harvest revenue, increase habitat, and reduce nitrogen and phosphorus in Maryland Chesapeake Bay. Over the next 25 years, a combination of replenishment and restoration activities should be undertaken in Eastern Bay with an equal amount of funding or SPAT planning and sanctuaries. 1 million annually adjusted for inflation and for SPAT and shell planting on fishery bars. 1 million annually adjusted for inflation. In addition to current replenishment and restoration activities, the effectiveness of this option should be evaluated every 5 years. So Dr. Moore, if we go back to the top, that is currently purple, correct? So that means that this action has rated 75% or higher and the text is approved.
That is correct.
Thank you. Now this one, the second option, it hasn't rated 75% or higher, but the text has not been approved. Business practices, investment allocation, and marketing recommendations. OAC members recommend the following. For the non-model option, E1, improve organization and cooperation among groups that integrate projects across the 3 sectors: fishery, aquaculture, and restoration. Agreements at 85%. Non-model option E2, improve processor capabilities and techniques. Examples given: more shucking houses, develop a frozen product. This has 100% agreement. Non-model option E3, use bars in the north as investments against disease outbreaks in Lower Bay. Agreement is 90%. Non-model option E5, use nutrient credit opportunities to help finance restoration and replenishment work in Upper Bay. This agreement is 90%.
So I think here we were going to have let commissioners talk amongst themselves just to see whether or not they approve of this language. For not, like whether that have a discussion about the language of these options,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
what I'm supposed to say.
Yeah.
We're not talking about approval here. It's
Yeah.
just about discussion about the language, the text.
Elizabeth or Quinn, can I ask a question?
Yes, this commissioner, whose commissioner is this?
Breyer.
Okay, Commissioner Breyer.
So thank you for having this session tonight. First of all, appreciate it. Just a point of process here. How, so we have text that we agreed upon, you know, somewhere between 80 and 100%. And then we have to approve it a second time, that we have to approve the text a second time. I'm just a little confused right now between what was agreed upon at 85, 100, 90, 90%, and why we would need to approve the text a second time. Can someone explain that to me?
I'll take a shot at it, Commissioner. This is Brian Polkinghorn. The language has been approved by the ratings, and in the previous meeting, what we were doing is to make sure that's what they agreed to, and it got into these discussions about specific meaning. It was meant to be more or less any type of tweaking. Really, if it's 100%, boom, it's 100%. No need to talk about it. And yeah, it's not an attempt to have a second bite at the apple or to rework something more favorably or whatever, but to have clarity. And that's specifically it, is clarity. Is that what we mean? And I think from the previous meeting, we ran into one instance where two groups of people had two different understandings, and that was the only reason. That was very helpful, because glad we caught it then and not catch it on November 8th. So it's really, this is what you guys agreed to. How does it look?
Brian, could I make a comment?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so just as a quick example as to why we're going through language apparently twice. If you look at that third one, it mentions use bars in the north. Well, someone reading the report who hasn't been with us won't understand what that means. So sometimes what you see here as language we've all approved and worked with isn't clear to other people. So there's some instances where the language just needs to be embellished or clarified. But the two above, just my opinion, the two above are pretty clear as written. Improve organization and cooperation among groups and integrate projects across the three sectors. The three sectors are named. You know, if they weren't named, a person reading this might think, what are the three sectors? So just my opinion here, since this is a listening session for ideas, the first one to me is perfectly fine. The third one would need some clarification. Maybe use bars in the northern part of the bay above the Bay Bridge, blah, blah, blah. So Mark, this is my 2 cents on why we're revisiting some of this text, basically just for clarity's sake. Now,
That's
Brian
helpful.
mentioned
Yeah, that's helpful, Chris.
Yeah, Brian mentioned a point from the last meeting. There was actually some, like, say, gut level reaction to the wording. It wasn't clear. I won't mention what it was. I don't want to open up a can of worms, but the option wasn't clear. And one group thought it meant one thing. Another bunch thought it meant something else. And those two ideas were at the extreme opposite ends of the spectrum. So in that case, revisiting the language in that case was very important, because basically two groups had very different ideas of what that meant. But I'm just using these first three as a quick answer to your question. Clarity is certainly one thing we want to achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Just to build on that for a second, I think the third one's a great example of, I think, a pretty simple one. The fifth one, the E5, is a little bit more like, we could go down a rabbit hole on that. Maybe we need to, but we'll, you know, I don't know exactly what nutrient credit opportunities mean, even though I'm pretty familiar with the idea and the concept. So some language, not just clarification, but some additional language may be important on some of these, but thank you.
Commissioner Miller.
Thank you, Quinn. So I just want to follow up on Mark Breyer's comments about clarifications of approved and not approved. I think we should be careful about the word approved, because some of these options may not make it into the final package. right? There may be, for an example, investment bars of the north are counter to other options that people prefer more. So just because something has been voted on in a previous meeting in isolation doesn't necessarily mean it will make the final package. And I think we just need to be careful about the sense that this is a done deal, because I don't think any of these things are.
Excellent point. And these things that have been thrown into the basket, whatever you guys decide in terms of the consensus agreement, I think you're absolutely right. This is just like clay on the wheel, and you may use some of it and some of it may be thrown out. Or your horse trade. It's just, if we have more clarity, we can help you on that last meeting and not get into the weeds with things. So yeah, I could see some stuff in here where people go like, nah, even though it's been approved by a ranking thing, it doesn't sit right with me. And this is where you guys can talk to one another and kind of think things through, so that when we get to November 8th, we can see really clearly where the common ground stuff is and where the horse trading can occur. So at the end of the meeting, you can have your vote. Do we want to, did I see it? I know. Quinn, you want to go to the next one? Oh, Thomas, do you still have your hand up?
Are we on option E1? That's what we're talking about?
We were on 5. We stopped at 5.
Oh, were we going that fast? Did everyone have a chance to discuss each one of those, or?
Rachel has a question in chat.
Commissioner Dean?
And I do have my hand up again, Paul, for Brian, rather, for when you come back.
Okay, we'll go to Rachel and then back to you. Where's Rachel's question? Did you say it was in the chat? Wait a minute.
Oh, well, actually, it's directly to me. What does
Oh.
north mean? Yeah, what does north mean? So that's something we can discuss. Does it mean north of the Bay Bridge?
And one, by the way, and one possibility is you guys can write that down and say, hey, these are some questions for clarification, so that the group tomorrow can see this and then be ready to discuss it.
If I remember the context, but Elizabeth might have a better memory. I think it did mean north of the Bay Bridge.
Elizabeth shaking her head, yes. Commissioner Miller.
Yes, I agree with that.
Commissioner Miller, did you want to?
Thank you. Sorry, my mute button wasn't responding. I also think as we think about these, we should be careful about things that are actionable and things that are not, or things that are measurable and things that are not, right? So option E1 is a great statement. Everyone would like to improve, but how on earth you say whether you've done that or not becomes a real challenge. And I think the extent to which we can make recommendations that are actionable, that text could occur in the body of the document itself, but someone's going to come back and score DNR against these recommendations, and making a recommendation that would be hard to measure puts DNR in a bit of a box.
So actionable, how do you take this option and make it actionable and measurable and everything that DNR needs to check off their list, so to speak? Okay. Robert T., did you have your hand up?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Look, on E5, it says using nutrient credits opportunities to help finance restoration and replenishment work in Upper Bay. Does, when you're talking restoration, is this just for the sanctuaries, or is this for the public ground that's to be worked on?
I believe that's Commissioner Shockley's option, so we have to verify that with him. Dr. North, do you know any extra information on this?
I thought finance restoration in my mind, and I was referring to sanctuaries, and replenishment refers to work on the public fishing bottom. But I think that's not clear, and it should be made more clear.
Yeah, that's what I recall from the discussion, but yeah, that could be cleared up. Yeah.
Well, I feel that it's got to have the public fishery worded into it, because without the public fishery, and you're just gonna use nutrient credit money just for restoration, that's not fair. You know, I'm not against restoration, getting some of it, but I mean, hey, it should be 50-50 for the public fishery, or we should get more because the sanctuaries don't make any shells for us, you know.
Okay. Dr. North, did you get that in your notes?
Yes, I have in my notes, could this be reworded, restoration on sanctuaries and replenishment on fishery bottom? I'm just putting questions here. Is that,
Yeah,
it's kind of a question to other people. I mean, I don't want to make the note sound like anyone's making any decisions, but,
right. Nope.
but I
nope,
just want to make sure that that idea is in the notes.
right.
So
you're-
what I'm doing right now is I'm going E1. I'm trying to have notes and questions for each of these different options. So, yes, so
Yeah.
the notes will reflect our discussions on each option.
Right, and the commissioners are have ideas, and this is all good, because maybe between now and then they can talk to one another and seek clarification, and when we get together, we can then do the real horse trading. I see Commissioner Breyer's hands up. Would you like to?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So, I mean, I actually think, Elizabeth and Brian, this is helpful to just go through these and flag areas that are not clear. And we can maybe not try to solve it at this moment, but just going through and highlighting where there's confusion or a lack of clarity
Mhm.
allows us to sort of all jump in and say, hey, we can make this better. So where Robert T was on E5 there, I want to expand another area of with a lack of clarification, which is use nutrient credit opportunities. As Tom said on E1, I'm not really sure what that would look like. And I don't know what the department or anyone else would do in that regard. There's a lot of potential different ways that a nutrient credit market, if it developed, could help finance things, but that would require a lot of, I think, regulations and maybe even legislation for that to occur. So the term used nutrient credit opportunities needs to be better defined.
Okay, so noted.
And so I have nutrient credit opportunities need language to clarify this term.
Yeah, Elizabeth, it's not clear who's using, who's doing the using
Mhm.
in that situation. Is that DNR? Is that anybody? Again, if there's a private market set up, one option would be, you know, there's tax on each credit trade, and that tax goes into a fund that helps finance replenishment and restoration. I don't know. Just an idea. Go ahead.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Sure.
Back in 2000, all the Bay Proper counties back then, when the state was dealing with the watershed implementation plans, and they would be phase 1, phase 2, and the secretary would probably know when she was a state delegate. One of the ideas that was being explored in the Eastern Shore delegation room at that time with the leadership in the Senate and the House was if you could use credits toward the watershed implementation plan for oysters that were planted in the Bay Proper counties. The idea would be that the county would go ahead and could use those credits on that bottom. Now, that never really took off because we had a change in administration, and I don't know where MDE was with that or is now. But that started to get a little bit of traction up where I'm at, Kent County in particular, because the county commissioners would budget a certain amount of funds a year to the county oyster committee to plant oysters in the Kent County waters. So to Mark's point, that was one avenue that was seriously being explored at the time. And it would be the county, or if you were an industry and you needed some type of credit with a watershed implementation plan for your project, you could also utilize that.
Okay. Thanks for the backdrop. That could be helpful for clarity purposes. Chris, you have your hand up? Oh, it's Secretary. Jeannie, you have your hand up? Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'll always defer to Chris. I wanted to just respond to Commissioner Mullins' comments and say that that is definitely still on the radar. It is not a state of Maryland decision it alone. It is something that is worked through the Chesapeake Bay program, specifically through the goal implementation teams. So the aquaculture portion has been approved, and the exploration of nutrient credit opportunities for the commercial sector is in review. And the last update I got from the goal implementation team is that it would be early 2022 before a final decision was rendered, but that is still moving forward and it's still under consideration.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, it is just a general comment, and obviously feel free to disagree. As we wordsmith, I remember this from before when we did this. Wordsmithing is good, can bring clarity. We're having that discussion right now. But if things get over wordsmith, I'm looking at, we see 90% agreement on some of these. Too much wordsmithing can start to lose a consensus. So I'll just straw man this. So use nutrient credit opportunities. Okay, who's going to use them? Well, there's lots of opportunities for different groups, especially if the marketplace gets rolling, et cetera. So if we wanted to clarify, well, who's going to be doing the using? Well, do we say government? Do we say non-government? Do we say government and non-government? Do we environmental? So if we get too specific on some of our language that we might tweak, I'm concerned we'll start to lose consensus. We have 90% on this. It's unclear to the normal reader who would pick up the report and say, well, who's doing the using? But the OAC has reached 90% agreement. So to wrap it up, as we wordsmith these and clarify, and obviously some clarifications are needed, I just hope we maintain that sense of broadness and maintain some level of consensus. That's all.
Yeah. If 9 out of 10 are going for this, I agree that there's an inherent risk of picking around the edges till it all frays and falls apart. Can I ask a question to Jeannie? So with all these things that the commissioners are working on and reaching tentative agreement, is there a possibility that you could come back later on to the OAC and say, hey, you guys agreed to this? Could we talk about this a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something I mentioned at the end of the last meeting, but I realized that by then people are tired. Attention spans are short, but even though the report is due December 1, and I think it's really important that we continue to finalize as much as we can before December 1. The work is certainly not over just because the calendar has changed over, right? We're still going to need the OAC, and I know a lot of people feel like there's unfinished work or additional things they would like to do. So we're always going to be looking to the OAC for advice, even after that December report is done. But maybe we'll give everybody a month off from meetings for the holidays and then come back fresh.
How nice of you. So So agreement in principle like this could get to you, and then you could come back and say, and as Chris is saying, that there's a group history here as to what these things mean. But could you help flush this out for the average reader or something like that? So the clarity doesn't need to be 100% now, just enough that you guys as commissioners say, yeah, that's what we meant. And then leave it at that. We don't have any surprises. And then maybe after the holidays, if there's something you need real, can we dig a little deeper? We might have time to do that. Is that what I'm hearing? She gave us a thumbs up. Okay.
Can I say one thing? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. The other, just in response to Chris's point, this report's going to DNR, so this is OAC's recommendations to DNR, and then this language here is also up for improvement. OAC members recommend that DNR should improve, use. So I mean, some of this lack of clarity may just be because this sentence isn't clear enough. I'm just putting that out there.
Okay. I would throw that in your notes.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the first batch that people agreed to. Pretty good response rate, pretty high agreement rate. Hopefully, the way I'm used to doing it, you throw it in the basket and you go, and then you worry about how you package it up later on. But these numbers look good. So what about, you want to move on to the next set?
If commissioners on the call want to, are there any other things they want to point out about these?
I don't see anybody.
So education and training recommendations. There's important need to educate and train citizens about stewardship of the oyster fishery and resources to maintain it for current and future generations. Non-model option F1, special effort should be placed on outreach and education in minority communities to enhance awareness of the oyster resource and associated career opportunities and environmental benefits. Agreements 85%. Are there any comments or questions from commissioners? Okay, I think we can move to the next one.
Yep.
Improved science recommendations. OAC members identified several knowledge gaps, which is if filled, will enhance management of the oyster resource. Non-model option G1, conduct a comprehensive survey of the Maryland Bay bottom with a focus on describing the current amount, quality, and location of oyster habitat. You might want to discuss and talk about that one. That's 90% agreement. Next, non-model option G2, develop the ability to make stock assessment forecasts of abundance and harvest. That agreement is 75%. Any questions or comments or clarity needed?
I just have a question. I should have asked this probably a couple weeks ago.
Commissioner Judy?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I
Oh,
forgot
you're
to
good.
raise
No,
my
you're
hand.
fine.
But I'm just curious how that ability would be developed. Maybe I should talk to Mike tomorrow. Just curious.
Talk to Mike to anticipate somebody else is going to ask that question again. Okay.
Commissioner Miller?
So Chris, that requires the ability to make some assumptions about how future settlement is going to turn into oyster abundance, right? And the way it's done in fisheries models often is by sampling at random in past recruitments. And you do multiple draws from past recruitments to forecast what potential recruitments might be. And that's the most model agnostic way of doing it, is to assume what you're going to get in the future is what you've already received. The other option is to infer that there is some functional relationship between the number of oysters you think are going to be reproducing in the subsequent settlement. My suspicion is Mike will go the route of sampling from existing settlement patterns.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other comments or questions? Non-law option G4, determine ways to reduce sedimentation. Has 100% agreement. Commissioner Miller?
So here's another perfect one that strikes me as somewhat meaningless, right? I think we already know ways to reduce sedimentation. The question is it the implementation of those methods? Is it further further explaining those techniques or those approaches? I think you can see 100% agreement because it doesn't really mean anything.
So from a functional perspective, you might be saying, so what do those methods look like? Or taking existing methodologies or something along, maybe in principle, people agree to this generalized statement, which in itself is vague, but there could be further clarification as to, like, with the existing stuff, how and where and when, to get those more specific types of actionable pieces.
So DNR could go through and determine ways to reduce sedimentation.
Mm-hmm.
Does that just determining the ways, does that have any impact anywhere? It strikes me that that's not what people want, just to determine the ways. They want actually the agencies, and whether it's DNR or other groups, to actually reduce sedimentation.
I think these were, yes, but these are improved science recommendations. So this is calling for, I guess, new ways to reduce sedimentation. I'm not sure, but I'm just trying to offer what might make this more specific and still be in this pot of improved science.
That's something.
Commissioner Wilkins, and then Commissioner Cover. Commissioner Wilkins?
Yeah, my question is, in this whole section here, where's the money to go pay for all this? And then wouldn't this money that's going to cost to do a comprehensive survey will cost a lot of money? Wouldn't it be better to use the money for substrate than to do all these studies? Wouldn't we be better off getting substrate on the bottom first?
Anybody have any thoughts?
I can offer one thing, is that it's the OAC is not saying that DNR should pay for this, just saying these are knowledge gaps, and it might be that some academic person might want to try to get money from a foundation or a federal agency or something like that to try to help forward knowledge about what OAC wants. So there's no, I mean, that's just one thought.
Commissioner Cover?
Yeah, I agree with the discussion about the determine ways to reduce it. I mean, again, is this like talking about bay-wide cover crops, or is it talking specifically about oyster reefs? And I think that sedimentation is going to happen, and maybe it needs to say ways to remediate sedimentation, building up three-dimensional reefs and that sort of thing. But it just seems broad in scope. And again, I didn't really know clarity-wise whether we're talking about specifically how you on an oyster reef could help remediate the effects of sedimentation, or as opposed to a bay-wide thing of cover crops and less development. That seemed like that's out of the scope of the OAC.
Commissioner Brown?
With, we know all are opposed to having this sediment and stuff, and just saying determine what's happening with it's so vague that it's not, doesn't say like make some type of improvement or introduce a new method of helping to stop sediment. That is one thing, but as far as it goes on the other one down there, where it had to do with the shell and the substrate, how long it stays there, and this, that, and the other, that's a study to do that is a waste of money, for the simple reason you're going to have storms and stuff that are going to have such adverse effect on any kind of study that you do, that you're better off just taking that money and buying substrate and put on the bottom.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Any other comments, questions, or discussion? Next, non-model option G7. Conduct studies to estimate the loss rates of shell, both newly planted and existing bottom. The agreement was 85%. Any comments or discussion for this one? Non-model option G8. Conduct studies to estimate the loss rates of artificial substrate. Agreement is 75%. Oh, Commissioner Brown, is your hand up?
Why do you want to study about what kind of bottom's going to hold shells up or substrate? We know what it takes. I mean, this is stuff that you're going to study the same thing over and over and over again. We know that if you put stuff on mud, it sinks. If you put it on pure sand, you got sifted, a shifting bottom that can cover it. So you know, it's a lot of this is common sense, and we don't need to have studies on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Any other comments or questions, discussion? Shell resource recommendations. Non-model option A4. DNR should conduct pilot projects to study the efficiency of different substrates, examples given small stones and mixed shell, and the effect of height and sedimentation rates. Agreement is 82%. Any kind of comments or discussion, questions?
Well, just as a, well, Chris, sorry, forgot to raise my hand. Just as a little historical fact people might be interested in, this was done to a large extent back in the 70s. They looked at fresh shell, dredge shell, stones, some other, slag. So this has been done, but what's of interest, that's back when the bay was more functional. Spat sets were more, well, regular and higher. So just wanted the group to know that there actually is a report on some of this from many decades ago, but it wouldn't hurt to revisit it because the bay is quite different.
Thank you, Commissioner Judy. Non-model option A 78 version 2. DNR should work collaboratively with the OAC to commission an academic peer-reviewed study to evaluate the ability of bar cleaning to clean shell and harvest areas in preparation for spat sets. Agreement 82%. Any thoughts related to this one?
Troy's got his hand up.
Commissioner Wilkins? Oh, you're
Lord.
clapping.
You know, it's clapping. Sorry about that.
Good. My question is, you got 82% on that. How many commissioners voted on that to make it 82%? All of them?
No, let me look that up. I can get that to you in just a sec.
My concern with this one here was, I didn't vote for it, I don't think, is I don't see why the OAC needs to be involved in reviewing what's going on with bar cleaning. That's what we got a DNR to do it already.
I think Dr. Narth is looking at to see.
Sorry, I'm trying to find.
Oh
it.
yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
In the
7,
meantime-
this is,
Yeah,
go ahead.
while you're doing that, Commissioner Miller has this.
Commissioner Miller?
I think the reason that the OAC was put in there, Troy, was so that people on the OAC who wanted to be involved could have a say in how the study was, excuse me, was conducted.
That's good clarification. Elizabeth, are you looking for the spreadsheet?
I am. I'm sorry. I just
See if I can dig it up.
not something that is right. Just okay. Just want to make sure non-model option 7A, the AOC should work with DNR to create. Let's see. We had 17 OAC members rate this one. So yeah, 17 of the voting members rated this one.
Commissioner Waples?
Yes. It says a study to evaluate harvest areas. Well, in harvest areas, you already got that because it's being harvested. Where we need to clean shell is where it's not being harvested at.
Commissioner, you broke up on the front end of your statement, and we picked up where you were talking about where things are being harvested and not.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What I was saying is it's the question or the ability of bar cleaning to clean shell and harvest areas. Well, harvest areas is not where you need bar cleaning because we're working, that area is being worked. So you're automatically getting the bar cleaning. You need to do this in areas where you either don't get a spat catch or the oyster production's down, or I mean, even in areas where we're not allowed to harvest, if you've done some kind of bag to dredge in there, you would definitely see an improvement. As far as doing a bar cleaning on bottoms that we harvest, I just think that's useless. I mean, it's already being harvested, so it's being worked.
You got that, Elizabeth?
Yes, I'm getting that. Not a good to do this study on a place that's already being worked. Did I get that right?
Maybe, and just to piggyback on Bobby's point is maybe we find an area, we find some, if we're going to do this, you find some bars that either used to be harvested or not, or just silted over and you bring them up. So I think maybe we identify some areas that aren't in the harvest area, that aren't regularly harvested, The idea, I think, would be to bring them back.
Okay,
That's my opinion.
okay. Chris, you got,
Yeah, so to follow up on that, that's a good point. So maybe a way to tweak this, cleaning shell and harvest regions, because you don't want to clean shell in a sanctuary. They can't harvest there. So you do want to clean shell in a harvest region, River X or wherever. But obviously, as Bobby says, not the harvest bar because they're working it. So maybe just a slight word change. You want to do this in an area where it's legal to harvest. Maybe the word region would help that one instead of area. Just a thought.
mhm. Would it be appropriate? I'm just thinking about Elizabeth writing all these notes down. If you don't capture anything, would it be appropriate to ask somebody to send you their thought or idea? Elizabeth, is that okay? I mean, is that within the rules? Because we're not having a meeting, we're having a listening session.
I don't know. I mean, we can assemble
We could ask Jody.
assemble comments but they probably should go to Quinn for the group. But I think I'm trying hard to get the
Okay,
information here, and I will share this with with commissioners after this meeting. I'll clean it up a little bit. People don't, I mean, you don't want to see my spelling right now. And then I'll just send it to Quinn and she could send it to the whole group. And commissioners who attended tonight can just make sure that I captured their comments. And if I didn't, they can, let Quinn know. And then also the folks tomorrow night will be able to see this too.
Mhm.
And it'll help with communication. Does that sound like an okay plan?
yeah, that actually sounds very good.
Okay.
Practically, process-wise. All right, Quinn, where were we?
Any other comments, questions regarding A7A? We can move to the next one. Management action recommendations. Non-model option C5. DNR should consider annual changes in regulations in response to annual stock assessments. Agreement 78%. Do we have any comments, questions, discussion regarding this one? Option C5.
Commissioner Brown?
Commissioner Brown, then Commissioner Miller.
Commissioner Brown, could you, we're not catching you. I think your microphone's too far away.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
thanks.
Okay, I got quite a bit of problem with this for the simple reason the stock assessment said that Tangier Sound is being over harvested at the present time, and Broad Creek also, and a couple of other places. And that is the heart of our oyster fishery now, and is doing very well. And this stock assessment is not going through far enough of a period of time to prove how well it's doing. And I've asked Mike earlier about this, and he couldn't answer that question why it was being over harvested to my satisfaction, and some other watermen also. So that's one of the reasons I have such a hard problem with it. I mean, this stock assessment isn't a proven fact like we have with our full winter drudge survey checking the spat on oysters and stuff. So I mean, I got a big problem with this one. Thank you.
Commissioner Miller?
Thank you, Brian. I think it is risky, even were all of Robert T's concerns addressed, to think that the department was going to conduct an annual assessment and base regulations on that annual assessment, because I suspect that that's at far too high temporal frequency. So you would be chasing the noise rather than chasing the underlying trend. Right? I think you'll find that annual assessments are too high a frequency. So I think if you considered changing that to just dropping the annual out of both sides, then I think it gives the department and the people doing the assessments the freedom to do it at a rate and a pace that they think is best. And I think specifying that it has to be done each year is wrong. We don't, for example, do blue crab assessments every year. We set the regulations, or the department sets the regulations based upon an assessment that was done in 2017 and updated by data from the winter dredge survey. And I could see a similar pattern here where an assessment is done at some frequency and the regulations are based upon perhaps the full dredge survey or something like that. I think this is going to box the department in a way that they will find very unhelpful.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Brown, how would you want to reword C5? You want to reword it, or what are you thinking?
I'm not in favor of it at all for the simple reason the stock assessment. I mean, it's something new that they put out, and whereas a whole lot of it at first was over harvested, then it came back the following year with it, and a lot of it had improved. But some of the best grounds we have, the backbone of our fishery in Oyster, because perhaps because it's in the lower part of the bay, which I think it is. It has better water down there and a higher salinity. And they're saying that's being overfished. I'm not in favor of this at all.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Any other comments or questions? Modeled option 7A, version 2. The OAC supports keeping low harvest oyster bars in the public fishery. Commissioner Judy, do you want to state what you placed in the chat?
Well, that's fine. People can read it.
Well, some people who are, I don't know if we record it, if the people who.
Some people.
Well, some people
Can you
can't
see the
read it,
chat?
yeah.
They
Yeah.
can see the
Oh, well,
chat.
just, all right, well, I'll just summarize it real quick. So Dr. Miller had very good points. I agree. Annually isn't necessarily the best way to proceed with the stock assessment. He spoke on that more eloquently than me. And there is an issue with Tangier and Broad Creek. I think they need a closer look. We do need to basically further analyze and look at the stock assessment. Those two areas are quite functional. They produce spat, smalls, and markets quite well. And I think they deserve a closer look. So the stock assessment has value, but I think it's too much to ask for it to produce annual results as it's stated here.
Thank you, Commissioner Judy. So model option. Commissioner Dean said, I share the same concerns as Commissioner Brown about the stock assessment. Thank you, Commissioner Dean. Model option 7A, the OAC supports keeping low harvest oyster bars in the public fishery. Agreements 80%. Any comments, discussions? Okay, thank you. Next one. Oh, Commissioner Breyer. I'm trying to scroll through my window to the right, so I may not see everybody. So Commissioner Breyer, I see your hand.
Yeah. Quinn, I don't know if you want us to just jump in or how you'd like us to do this. I guess similar to the example at the beginning that Chris noted with North, would we know, is there any definition needed on what low harvest means?
Good point. See Bob's hands up.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's been discussed. Good question.
Commissioner Dean's asking, is low harvest equal any harvest? Commissioner Waples?
I think
Yeah,
it's
we
Mike
still
right here.
on the,
Oops. Go ahead, Bob.
can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
always was under the impression that low harvest bars are 200 bushel or less per season. I could be wrong on that, but I've heard that somewhere.
That rings a bell. Maybe Mike said that one. That's
Yeah.
familiar.
I agree that Mike could answer that. But that I think is the kind of numbers that would help this.
So we could throw that over to Mike and see if he can get a response to us.
Thank you, Commissioner Waples. Any other comments? Discussion?
Okay.
Model option 25A, version 1. The OEC does not support closing all bottom to oyster harvesting. Agreement 87%. Then model option 25A, version 2. The OEC supports keeping the oyster fishery open. Agreement 75%.
80, is it 87%?
87%. Yeah, 87%.
So so of the options, these two had the exact same percentage of rating agreement.
For both versions.
Mhm. It's like that donkey caught between two bales of hay, which way you go. Anybody have any comments? I think Dr. Miller.
So I think both of these statements are incomplete and because of that unhelpful. I certainly don't want to see an oyster fishery closed, nor do I want to see bottom closed. But I really worry about a blanket statement like this that has no out clause. And I would urge us to think about out clauses that people may want to have in the coming years. And I don't know what those conditions will be, but I can assure you those conditions may well occur. And to have this as a rod over someone's back, I think is unwise and unhelpful. So I would suggest something along the lines of modifying it with specific ideas of when things could happen, right? Because I don't get the impression that the OAC supports keeping the oyster fishery open. Is that one boat? Or is that exactly as it is now? These just strike me as points to use in a debate, not anything that helpfully moves guidance to DNR forward.
We had a question, Dr. Mel, we had a question in the box saying, please define out clause.
So if you had this, let's take the second version, which just says, the OAC supports keeping the oyster fishery open. So DNR, for some reason, and I'm not suggesting this will happen, comes up with a rule that says only Robert T is allowed to fish, right? That's keeping the oyster fishery open. There's a fishery, but it's not what anyone wants. And so these broad statements like this, I think, provide no guidance to the agency as to what people want. And I think we should be very careful about passing them.
Okay.
Yeah, but the fishery is going to be dictated by the number of people that are participating in it. So if you look at the oyster surcharge, that's one example you could use. If you really want to narrow it down, you would look at the number of participants.
Commissioner Dean?
Yeah, thank you, Quinn. I'm having some difficulty on my computer not getting audio, but I think I got you now on the phone. I just wanted to say that I share the same concern that Dr. Miller has about this. I've said it before in a prior meeting. You can keep an oyster fishery open and still have a moratorium. So for that reason, I don't like either one of these.
How would you like to reword it, or what are you thinking?
I would just say that, I know where our conversations went a couple meetings back, and I fully understand the sentiment of the industry, because I share the same intimate, and I would love it. I share it. I would love nothing more than to have the promise and the wholehearted promise from everyone that there would never be a moratorium or an oyster fishery closure. But I'm not naive enough to think that some people wouldn't advocate for that. So I'm a little bit scared in general that this actually would hurt us because of the way that this is worded and because it's not wordsmithed correctly. So I personally don't want it in here at all. But that is not my decision.
Thank you, Commissioner Dean. Commissioner Miller?
So I just want to build off what Rachel says. I think these kind of statements drive people to their corners. I don't think they lead to consensus. And I think they are extremely unhelpful for exactly the kind of reason that Rachel just said, right? You can pass a statement like 25A and feel really good about it and not get what you want at all. This should be a statements about what we want and what we want to achieve in terms of participation and what you want to achieve in terms of entry to the fishery and what you want to achieve about investments in the fishery, not blanket statements like this, which are intended not for the OAC audience, but for an external audience. And as I said, I think they're unhelpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Breyer?
Yeah, I appreciate both of you, Rachel and Tom, with providing some context for these statements. I've been feeling uneasy about them, and I think you both put your finger on maybe why. So it would be interesting at some point to step back and look at what we've done so far. And in particular, I'd like the industry members to weigh in on this. Like the statements we've made thus far reflect the kind of industry that we'd like to see in the future. I'm in no position to answer that. But Tom, to your point, keeping it open versus this is the kind of fishery we'd like to see, and these are the actions that the state or the department could take to help us get to an industry that looks like this is more the direction we'd like to go. Is that fair?
So just to follow up as an example, the kind of amendment that Rachel raised at the October the 12th meeting, where she was working hard to bring multiple options together to say how we want things to look, I think is a much, much better way of going forward than these, what I think of as sort of motherhood and apple pie statements, which resonate with people's constituencies, but in the end don't mean anything.
Commissioner Dean?
I think I want to give an example and maybe articulate what I mean, and then I'll let it die. I think a much more helpful statement would be one such as the department will not reduce the number of oyster licenses in the state of Maryland. Something along those lines, or will maintain the number of oyster licenses or active oystermen. But like I said, I think this one it's open, but here's your moratorium. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that this one is obviously a contentious option, along with another option. So Brian and the team discussed a few things. So at the November meeting, at the beginning, we're gonna ask everybody to look at options or any option that you said, this option cannot be in the package, or I will vote no for the entire package. And this may be one that commissioners may want to throw out. So that's something just to think about as an option or opportunity for the November meeting. Because both sides obviously don't like this option.
But, okay. But it did get 87%.
True, but I think as people start to think about it more and discuss it, the consensus, to build a consensus process.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Elizabeth, I would think of it this way. It kind of gets to Dr. Miller's thing about motherhood and apple pie and whatnot. It's a buffet, and they got to package it up as a group to those things that they're able to horse trade on, and some stuff may be left on the table. But I think the hook is, the good thing is that the secretary is saying that after the fact, I mean, just to meet this deadline, after the fact, there could be more discussions, and the expertise of this commission will be necessary to hammer out some things and get some clarity. So if it doesn't make it on, that's their decision.
I just want to get into this just real quick. Is we have this menu of options, right, for the public fishery. This is not restoration. This is not sanctuary. This is an economic engine, right? And so far, all of these options have been laid out, either voted, consensus wise, I'll say. So at the end of the day, wouldn't the recommendations support both of these? At the end of the day, you would say we have these recommendations for the public fishery, and at the conclusion, with these recommendations, we don't support closing bottom, and we support keeping the fishery open, and here are the menu of the reasons why. I mean, that's just a different spin on it, if you understand what I'm saying. It's just something to think about. I know we've got time, and this is just a listening session, but sitting here and I've got all my stuff here from all the other meetings that I went through to prepare for tonight. And so that's just one thought, is everything we've been building is to make sure that this doesn't happen,
Well, this is a perfect example of not just clarity, but I don't want to say a tactic, but to bring that up, have forewarning to bring that up, so that might be included if what you're saying could be modified here. We get the package together and say, hey guys, isn't this where we're heading? So if you can remember that for the November 8th meeting, we capture it in the notes. That might be getting people thinking about, well, okay, if we were to do something like this and to make it practical, what would the words look like? And I think that's what I'm hearing you saying.
right?
Okay.
Basically. I mean, we've spent almost 2 years on this, and so you get to the finish line, and the whole reason of doing this is to make sure that we do have a public fishery and that we don't close any bottom. And this is the menu of the recommendations to back up that.
Gotcha.
And I'm hoping that might answer some of those questions, the lingering questions out there, because every year when legislature starts, somebody comes forward with a bill that wants to kind of do some harm to the fishery. So anyway.
Commissioner Wilkins, Commissioner Brown, and then Commissioner Dean. Commissioner Wilkins.
Okay, for me, this is, I understand it is kind of broad, but you take people that I'm here trying to speak for, a young man that has a family, that has bills to pay, this is what his living is. Even though this is broad, it does give him some kind of insurance that what's going on here is he's to not take a job away from him, or he has some future that he knows he's going to have a job here. So that's my thought on this, on these two right here.
Thank you, Commissioner Wilkins. Commissioner Brown?
Yes, you know, if we were to keep this, the public fishery open and maintain the amount of licenses, oyster licenses that are legal as of today, the amount that have been issued, maintain it at that high, at that rate. So then that would put it, hey, look, we're saying we're keeping it all open and we're just limited to the ones that have oyster licenses now, not surcharges, oyster licenses, just a thought.
Thank you. And Commissioner Dean, if you want to. Commissioner Dean?
No, Quinn, thank you.
All right, thanks. And Commissioner Judy?
Yeah, I had to step away for a second. So I had a question for Jim Mullen. You've often talked about the three-legged stool. I came in sort of near the end of your comments. So were you basically saying you want to see a message where the three-legged stool is embraced and each unit is supported? And was that basically what you were saying? Oh, you're muted.
Commissioner Mullen, you're muted.
Excuse me. I guess what I was saying was, you know, okay, these are general statements, but what backs these statements up are the list of recommendations that have consensus in the package. So you would say, well, we have this list of recommendations within the package that support not closing Oyster Bottom and that support keeping the fishery open. And these are the list of recommendations that we're going to rely on to support these two options here. But I think within that package, there is that three-legged stool stitched, you know, with all of what we've been through here almost 2 years going through this exercise.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Does anyone else have a comment or question? I see some hands raised. Commissioner Wilkins, do you still have a comment or question?
No, I'll take my hand down.
Thank you. Next.
I think Chris has his hand up.
Commissioner Judy, you have a question or Judy?
I need to get my hand down. Let me do that. Sorry. Okay.
I think there's questions in the chat.
There was one about the changing from Commissioner Dean about the ratings. I hope I answered it. So she says, so there are other options that could have agreement because the results are not in. And it's been a challenge to get people to provide ratings for a variety of reasons. And at some point in time, you got to fish or cut bait. And so far we have 17. And yeah, things could change. But there are some people from the original ratings that very few that didn't hand stuff in, but it didn't change anything at all. So I'm hoping, you know, the 9 we have left outstanding, we'll get 5 of them and we'll be about where we were before. But yeah, the short answer is things could change. They didn't the first 2 times, but you just never know.
One of the challenges is that the model option 63, we did get a lot of ideas back about how to change it, but it did not have, it had a pretty low agreement threshold because there are a lot of options to a lot of ideas for changing it. And we hadn't really worked out how to share these options, how to share the comments with commissioners. So we weren't, we're not going to be talking about options that didn't make the 75% agreement threshold at this meeting.
One thing though, that's I think very helpful and constructive about the way people wrote their statements about those multiple, the package things that Commissioner Dean had spoke about the last time around is it's got people thinking about not just atomizing and taking an option, just throw it in the bin, but that combination thing. We are late in the game, but I think if DNR sees those sorts of things, I don't want to speak for the secretary, but that kind of thinking I think is really creative and helpful. But what do we do with the amount of time we have left? And I worry about it's just we're out of time, but I worry about those models and would there be ever any time to run those things? And I know some people are just saying no, but that's where creative thinking is coming into play. So maybe we need to figure out a way, Elizabeth, to show those comments for 63, because it's really like, oh, that's interesting. But, I just worry about the time on the clock.
Well,
Good point. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
So one thing, I mean, this is a discussion section and it's a listening session. So, if the commissioners are finished with what they're talking about 25A, they can bring up, I believe they can discuss whatever they want.
Right.
Yeah. And if they ask me for information, I'm happy to provide it.
So if people wanted to throw around ideas among themselves about multiple option packaging and stuff like that, now's a good time to do it.
Yeah. And I'm sure that I can read comments. So are we finished with option 25? Did commissioners want to have any, people want to try to make suggestions for changing the additional suggestions for changing the text, or we want to talk about something else?
Now, there was a lot of really interesting points about these are sort of like summation statements, and if all these things are in there, it should support something of a broad nature like this. But we should hear from the other group, and those notes should be shared with everybody, because that's oh, hold on a second. I just saw Mark says I share that same concern. Could you elaborate on that?
I was agreeing with Rachel's comment that if we don't get to making some more significant recommendations that we can agree upon, it feels like we're not meeting the charge of the commission.
So would you like me to, am I hearing that people want to discuss combined option 63?
I think it would be interesting, Rachel, I don't want to speak for you. I think it'd be interesting to hear some of the comments that were provided on that, where there was concern and new ideas. If nothing else, for us to sleep on it.
Commissioner Dean, you have a comment, question?
Yeah, thank you, Quinn. No, I just want to say I'm not married to option 63. I'm married to the idea that we can meet the charge of this commission in such a way that we are taken seriously, and that industry is not penalized in the future. So yeah, I'd love to hear the feedback. I had hoped that this commission would offer other examples of combinations, but to be honest, I don't think that the industry saw that coming. None of us did. And, we started to put those packages together at the end, realizing what was happening. But I just, I don't think we understood the direction. And now we're at the finish line.
Elizabeth, can you pull those up for us to see?
Yes, yeah. Would you like me to share my screen
Yeah.
about it? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So this is model option 63, combo 2, 3, 4, 13, 14. Just a reminder, 2 is modified old seed and shell. 3 was modified complete restoration of St. Mary's and Minokan sanctuaries. 4 was 2018 harvest limit regulation. 13 was rotational harvest in Upper Bay. And 14 was 5 new large-scale restoration areas. So we have a commissioner saying protect CBF projects, and this is comments from the survey to try to make this one better. Revert number 3, 14 to original parameters. Eliminate 4, eliminate 13, reduce reliance on seed from Virginia, remove any reference to limiting alternative substrate use, change rotational harvest to harvest reserve management based on monitoring and biological criteria, bring down the annual cost. Also, we were not able to see any of these modified options modeled before being combined into this mega option, so we don't know the relative value of any of them individually. I would likely not be able to remove my reservations unless this was modified and we were able to see the modified model results and along with the results of its component parts. Would much rather see fewer options combined so we can actually understand what's going on. Having a properly moderated meeting with discussions, not a Google poll. I'm in a meeting screen, I'm sorry. Manage the rotational harvest based on monitoring and biological criteria. I'm sorry. Manage the rotational harvest based on monitoring and biological criteria. Remove all references to limiting the use of alternative substrate. Eliminate 4 and 13. DNR must monitor every bar prior to opening the bar to ensure that it meets target abundances and may, based on results of the survey, elect not to open the bar. Increase enforcement to ensure only open bars are fished. Is reliance on seed from Virginia possible? Eliminate wild seed out of state. Eliminate number 4 as harvest rate should be set / modified based on stock assessments. Eliminate 13, no harvest in sanctuaries. Return 14 to original form, far too extensive to start. Don't open high performing bars in sanctuary to harvest. If any rotational harvest is going to be implemented in sanctuaries, there needs to be some scientific showing of non or underperformance to justify that. The option should also be clear that the 5 new large-scale restoration sites cannot be open to harvest ever. Any prohibition against alternative substrates should be removed. Also, we should not have to rely upon shell from Virginia. The goal is to be self-sustaining. Also, all the sanctuaries in the Upper Bay should not be open to rotational harvest. Need to establish clear monitoring and biological criteria to the extent this is proposed. Also, it is unclear what the model results are of this large proposal. Item 13, remove 25% of the bars being open to harvest every 4 years. Remove item 14 altogether. This first, permit use of alternative substrate. Select these trips for large scale: Nanticoke, Eastern Bay, Hooper, Chester South. And 3, remove out of state VA reference for seed until feasibility established. So those were, that was the feedback that came from the survey. And yes, there it is.
Commissioner Dean?
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. I think you're on a shared screen, so if you scroll back up for me, I think that the third bullet under there is maybe more of my concern than option 63. It says having a properly moderated meeting with discussions, not a Google poll. I think whoever wrote that, and it wasn't me, really is getting at the heart of, I guess, what my concern is that I'm trying to share here. I don't want to put any words in Allison's mouth since she's not here, but looking at bullet 2, I'd love to have a discussion with her about some of those issues that she points out. So, I think really just my concern is that, again, are we meeting the charge of this commission And if not, what progressions are going to come down out of legislature and in the future, and out of future administrations on the industry for that reason.
Thank you, Commissioner Dean. Any other thoughts, discussion?
So this having a properly moderated meeting with discussions, not a Google poll. For clarity about what's coming up at the November meeting, I believe, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, that the first part is going to be going over the text of the options with the OAC. And then there will be a time for new ideas or new thoughts to come forward. And then it is time to plan a vote. So I just want to put that into your minds about that. And yeah, I'll just leave it there.
I want to piggyback on that because there is post-November 8th meetings possibilities on things. And I don't want to speak for the secretary, but I think if there's interest in this and there's movement in this area, I wonder what the DNR would think about this sort of thinking, this sort of creative discussions after December 1st.
Yeah, we would definitely be open to that, for sure.
So some of the ideas, some of the thing that's gone behind option 63 could still be on the table, so to speak, for this commission. You just need to make sure you hit that December 1st deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we just need to be able to demonstrate to the legislature that everyone has made a really good faith effort to put in the time and put in the work and push this as far as we can, given the constraints of the pandemic and the timeline, which I think we absolutely can, because every single commission member has put in a ton of work and a ton of time in this and has really taken it seriously. So I think the legislature will be able to easily recognize that. But yeah, certainly if there are additional items for discussion, or if we want to get people back together for breakout groups, whatever the commission would like to do, in terms of DNR, we don't see the work as being over. We see this as opportunity for ongoing discussion.
So Commissioner Dean, for those of you on the phone, wrote, "Thank you, Secretary. I wanted to feel some confidence in this." So we hit the deadline, but there's still good creative ideas that these commissioners have that you want to be able to continue to tap into DNR. Okay. Sounds good. Trying to be non-judgmental. Sounds good. All right, so where are we? Oh, we got some hands up.
Commissioner Miller.
So can I just follow up on that, Secretary? This commission exists under the legislation that framed it. When we submit the report, what's the mechanism that keeps the commission together in its current form?
So, we actually had an Oyster Advisory Commission before the legislation was established. And as far as I know, the Secretary of DNR has authority to assemble an Oyster Advisory Commission. The composition was made different by the legislation, and the parameters were set by the legislation. But, to your point earlier, Dr. Miller, we're going to need some continued conversations, we DNR and OAC, to make sure that we fully understand what the OAC is recommending. I know, for example, there's a recommendation to establish a work group. So if something like that goes forward, we're going to need to continue to work with OAC members that may be part of that work group. So, and we're always going to have oyster regulations and regulatory proposals that will need review as part of our normal scoping and regulatory process. So I do believe that there will be a continued role for OAC. And additionally, I am happy to explain to the General Assembly and particularly the sponsors of the legislation, this situation. That everyone has worked really hard and done a good job, but it was a really tight time frame given how long it took to develop the model, how long it takes to run some of the options, how long it took us to just adjust to a COVID environment and figure out how to do hybrid meetings. We had a lot of challenges, as if discussing oyster policy isn't difficult enough. We had a global pandemic thrown on top of that. So I don't know if that helps, Dr. Miller, but that's my 2 cents.
So I think it does. I suppose I was waiting to hear an expression of the composition of that OAC without asking you to make commitments to individuals, but the structure of this OAC was very deliberately chosen, and I think it would be helpful if there was some consideration to that structure being maintained, even if it's not with the same people per se, the same individuals, but the spirit of that structure was carefully thought out to try and build trust in the process, and I think that's important going forward.
So do you guys have any other creative ideas or thoughts, things that we could pass on to tomorrow night's group to combine and throw it over the fence to you some other day?
Commissioner Breyer?
Yeah, I want to, I'm not sure the time frame that I'm recommending this on between now and the November meeting or afterwards and whatever incarnation the OAC takes, but the process by which we as a group of people get together and interact and discuss and hopefully create creative ideas and try to find common ground on things is an area that I think of trying to I'm trying to underscore that I think would be valuable time well spent for us. And I would perhaps urge the facilitators or others to maybe explore different ways for us to interact. I am not an expert facilitator at all. I'm not even a novice facilitator, but I think there must be a lot of experience out in the world out there, particularly on fishery management issues, that get people to try to get to creative solutions as opposed to, as was said earlier, go to their corners. And so I'm just kind of curious about different ways and approaches and processes that we might undertake to see if we can get to places where we're nodding together as opposed to disagreeing with one another.
Any other comments or questions? So I would say this meeting has been recorded. We will definitely forward it out to everyone. We're just taking notes for the discussion and we will pass those along to everyone. And even tomorrow night, whoever wants to join, if you want to join, it's optional. If not, it will be the same type of discussion. No ratings will be taken. Dr. North will take notes, but nothing will be changed until everyone sees what both groups discussed. Brian?
Well, I was just hoping that being able to listen from everyone, we got an idea of where there seems to be some level of comfort in some of the options and other ones where, hey, we need to zero in and get creative come November 8th. And so there's fewer surprises and hopefully that helps with the process, because going to Mark's points about just facilitating in an odd, weird like place like this, I'm just surprised at how much you guys have done considering all the obstacles that have been mentioned. So, you know, you need to pat yourself on the back on that one. But let's be prepared, however tomorrow goes, whatever people say, let's be prepared for November 8th to look at the common ground thing and where people can do some head nodding. And that's where we got an idea that we throw something over to Jeannie and gang, and then just so she hits her required deadline, but the party's not necessarily over. And then maybe we can take into consideration those very serious limitations that we have. And at some other time, maybe after the winter break, we could actually do something face to face. Wouldn't that be? I thought we were going to be able to do that this fall, but who knows? Wouldn't that be good if we could do it in the winter? Quinn, do you have anything else, or should we just let everyone go do the thing and I'll render this recording?
Stop recording in the meeting. And also, can DNR unseason